In a world obsessed with productivity, you're told that motivation is everything. Get up early, hustle hard, dream big. But Machiavelli would laugh, not out of mockery, but because he knew the darker truth. Motivation isn't power. It's dependency disguised as drive. And awakening, real inner awakening, destroys it. Motivation, in the modern sense, is sold like a drug. Quick hits of dopamine through morning routines, loud affirmations, highlight reels of success. But what happens when you remove the carrot? What happens when the applause fades? What happens when the dream doesn't come true? Machiavelli understood something few dare to say. Motivation is easy to manipulate. Governments, corporations, leaders, they all use it to control behavior. They set goals for you. They define success. Then they reward you with praise, status, salary. And as long as you chase these, you stay predictable. You believe you're moving forward, but you're just circling a maze. The walls are made of belief systems, hustle culture, self-worth, tied to output, external validation. And the door is hidden behind the very motivation you cling to. Real power does not rely on being motivated. It does not wait for inspiration. It is cold, calculated, patient. Machiavelli's prince didn't move with excitement. He moved with necessity. When you awaken, you begin to see this trap. You begin to understand that most of your drive was actually fear. Fear of being irrelevant, unloved, unimportant. You were not chasing purpose. You were escaping insignificance. True awakening removes this illusion. And with it, the comfort of motivation dies. But what rises in its place is something far more potent. Intention without emotion. Action without permission. Movement without momentum. This is where real sovereignty begins. Not with fire, but with structure. Not with excitement, but with resolve. True awakening isn't about inspiration. It's about destruction. Machiavelli understood that once you see the system for what it is, once you pierce the illusion, your previous motivations chatter. Why? Because they were built on lies, on rewards, on approval, on illusions of success sold by those in power. Waking up is painful. You don't just lose comfort. You lose identity. You no longer recognize yourself in the goals you once chased. Your dreams feel foreign. Your ambitions dissolve. And all that remains is silence. A void where the old why used to be. Most can't handle this void. They crawl back to comfort, chase another guru, another goal, another dopamine rush. But Machiavelli would warn, this is the critical moment. If you retreat now, you lose your chance to build something real, something sovereign. Awakening burns. It doesn't inspire. It incinerates. It strips you down to your core. And what you find there isn't always noble. You find fear, envy, lust for control. The parts of you that served the system because they needed it to survive. But this is where freedom begins. In the ashes of illusion. In the wreckage of your programmed self. Machiavelli never romanticized clarity. He knew it made you isolated, made you responsible, made you dangerous. Because now, you see how things really work. Now you know how fragile the game is, how manufactured success is, how manipulated desire is. You don't get to wake up and feel good. You get to wake up and rebuild from zero. You get to let go of dreams that never belonged to you and forge purpose from pain. Not quick, not glamorous, but real. And in that realness, Machiavelli saw the seed of power. Not the kind that depends on admiration, but the kind that walks alone without apology. Awakening makes you dangerous. You see through games. You question rules. You become less obedient. But you also become disillusioned. Why chase goals designed by others Why sacrifice for structures you no longer respect? When the illusion cracks, what you see isn't just corruption or control. You see emptiness. You see a world running on repetition, on ritual, on roles. And you realize how much of your motivation was built not on truth, but on performance. You stop being impressed by success stories. You start seeing the machinery behind them. The marketing, the manipulation, the masks. What once inspired you now repels you, not because you hate ambition, but because you crave authenticity. This stage is lonely. It feels like betrayal. You don't belong to the old world, but you haven't yet built the new one. This is where most people quit, because they confuse disillusionment with depression. But Machiavelli would say, this is clarity. Don't run from it, use it. From this place, real strategy begins. You no longer seek to be motivated. You seek to be sovereign. You no longer beg for purpose. You begin to create it, step by step. With no audience, you stop asking, what will they think? You start asking, what is true? That question destroys illusions and births power. Idealism is useful when you're asleep. It gives you dreams, hope, fire. But when you awaken, idealism dies. You realize that most dreams were traps, beautiful distractions from the real game of power, of sovereignty, of truth. Machiavelli believed that idealism, though poetic, often blinded people. It lulled them into believing that the world could be changed by wishing it, that good intentions could overpower raw structures. Idealism seduces you into thinking things are fair, when power never promised fairness. Upon awakening, the fire of idealism is replaced with the stone of clarity. You begin to see how power moves, and it doesn't move by hope. It moves by leverage, by understanding psychology, by anticipating moves before they happen. Idealism tells you that virtue is its own reward. But in the world of Machiavelli, virtue without realism is suicide. He would rather you be feared and effective than loved and irrelevant. This doesn't mean you become cold or cruel. It means you become sharp, precise, real. You stop wishing. You start acting. Not to please, but to protect. Not to fit in, but to prevail. The death of idealism is not the death of values. It is the rebirth of values aligned with truth. It is the end of fantasy and the beginning of strategy. So what do you do when motivation dies? You act anyway, without the rush, without the audience, without the reward. Machiavelli taught that power is in consistency, not inspiration. In execution, not emotion. True motivation isn't energy, it's resolve. The awakened don't chase hype. They move in silence. They build without applause. And that's why they win. This is the brutal transition. From chasing sparks to carrying fire. From craving excitement to mastering repetition. The moment you awaken, you become responsible for your discipline. And that's where most people break. Because motivation coddles. It lifts you when you're down. But awakening demands. It pushes you to act, not because you feel like it, but because you must. Machiavelli admired the mind that could separate feeling from action. He didn't trust passion. He trusted persistence. The prince who survives isn't the one who believes in glory. It's the one who moves daily in the shadows, who prepares in silence, who builds without need for recognition. When you awaken, you no longer act to be seen. You act because not acting would betray your new vision. You don't rise because the world cheers. You rise because you refuse to fall asleep again. This isn't motivation. It's internal law. It's non-negotiable movement, not based on hype, but on clarity. You work not for success, but because working is the truth of your path. And that truth doesn't need witnesses, so you act. quietly, strategically, relentlessly, not for outcome, but because the awakened can no longer tolerate inaction. Machiavelli would say, "Now, you're finally free to play the real game." And in this game, the one who moves with quiet fire always wins the long war.